book was on Julian and Synesius, or Julian the Emperor and Synesius, Konversion zur Philosophie in der Spätantike. She wrote a second very, very interesting book, I think, on theurgy, theurgy in Platonism or late antiquity, in 2013. And then many, many articles also having to do with ancient philosophy authors like Plotinus, Porphyry, so many, Julian, of course, along with Cyclas. And for people in Leuven, especially interesting will be that she also has worked quite a good deal on the elements of theology of progress. So there is a forthcoming article, I think, or an article that has already been published on.
I think so, yes. So, yeah.
One and not one. So, but today she will talk about another topic that interests us a lot here in Leuven. Soteriology and physics, in this connection in late Neoplatonism. So the title is Binding the Binder, Physis and Soteriology in Porphyry and Iambricus. Please.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here, to find myself in a room full of Platonists. It's a diachronically throughout the Platonic tradition, and look forward to our discussion. The topic of the colloquia being physis, I have decided to focus on a certain aspect of physis, namely the way Neoplatonists treat it in soteriological contexts, as opposed to, let's say, contexts in which cosmology or demiurgy stands at the fore. Consider it to be a great provision for your journey to a blessed life, writes Porphyry to his wife Marcella, that which has been bound in nature, so that the menon and physé binds him who has bound it, ton desanta. For we have been bound by the fetters of nature, by the physeos desmois, with which he has surrounded us, with the stomach, the genital parts, the throat, all the other parts of the body, and the uses we make of them, and the pleasant sensations and the fears on their behalf. But if we get the upper hand over the sorcery and beware of the snare of the plot, goetheia is there for sorcery, and the paris, the trap, the snare, of the insidious plot. If we get the upper hand of it, we rise above it, we will have bound the binder. We will have bound him who has bound us. Do not therefore heed the body, whether you be male or female, nor do you conceive of yourself as a woman, for I too did not direct my attention to you as such. Thus, the flattering words of Porphyry to his wife. And of course, it has to do something with the genre of the text. The letter can be read, as already Pötter has described, as a protracted to a philosophical life, by which Porphyry exhorts his wife to continue her philosophical training and his her philosophical journey in his absence. It also functions as a practical tool, an enchiridion, so to say, to navigate life successfully as a philosopher. The journey on which Marcella is urged to embark is the typical Neoplatonic ascent from the sensible to the higher, intelligible realms and beyond, because Porphyry speaks a decidedly theological language in the letter, presenting the goal of the journey as communion with God to pure. And where Porphyry says God, Porphyry often means the one. It's hard to decide, especially in the case of the letter, because the letter, as you all know, makes use of a lot of earlier material, of sentences, which Porphyry weaves together and comments. For, let's say, a person acquainted with Porphyry, the connection between God and the summit of reality would have been there. This communion can be achieved, as Porphyry emphasizes, by an ever closer assimilation to God in everyday life. What is striking are the forceful expressions he employs. He talks about the struggle, about people binding each other, overcoming each other, about entrapment, sorcery, and fetters, painting a picture where we are entrapped and we must do our best to burst our bonds and to escape. The body, its gender, and all sensations of pleasure and fear, like instincts of self-preservation, for example, are in this perspective not part of a true person, but fetters of nature. The superior eye of the philosophical master of Porphyry sees through them and does not even pay heed to such aspects when treating people, for example, to the gender of his wife. Somewhat inconsistently with the masculine gender of Physis, that has made Döbler think about the demiurge here, but of course with a very big question mark. Porphyry identifies the enemy with nature. I think this is the best way in which to read this passage, that he uses a, let's say, very, too loud to...
No, I think there's an echo because your laptop is not muted and we're using this
I thought we had muted it.
Yeah.
Just one sec. So let's mute
but we're using this one, which is the room.
It's
so
muted.
let's see if...
It's muted.
No, your own is good, but now...
Yeah, it's muted. So it's like...
Okay.
Yes.
And the sound is also. But
Or shall we perhaps...
No, because she's the host.
This one. Let me see. I've got an idea. Maybe this one.
Okay.
Okay. Does it get better?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
okay.
fine. Thanks.
Now we only have to find again share screen, which is somewhere there, and to...
Yes. Okay. Great. Sorry.
So, okay, so as I said, I think it really wants to picture the enemy. Therefore, he uses the idea of an overpowering masculine enemy. But the one that we can identify as to fetter us is Physis. Physis plays an ambivalent role in the soteriological outlook of this treatise. This is understood as it will be during the whole talk, not as a synonym for reality, for substance, for being, or something like that. But this is understood as designating a distinctive force, or perhaps even hypostasis, that fosters, fuels, and governs living material embodied reality below the realm of soul, so to say, with soul at the crossroads of the higher and the lower, of the intelligible and divine, and the body and Physis. It is this ambivalent aspect of nature that will concern us. This ambivalent aspect is nothing that's typical of Porphyry or solely of Porphyry. It is, Porphyry can be taken past pro toto, a very graphic past pro toto, for the way in which Neoplatonism chooses to look at nature when talking about nature in soteriological context. I will focus on Porphyry and Iamblichus as the two figures whose discussion about nature and soteriology decisively shapes post-Plotinian Neoplatonic discourse on the topic. The two are commonly understood as espousing opposed philosophical options as far as the situation of the soul in the material world and the soul's suspense are concerned. Is this reflected in the way they speak about nature in contexts regarding assent? Can we oppose them as two fundamentally different approaches, not only to the soul, but also to matter and physics? I will try to explore this by focusing on writings which gravitate around the ascent of the soul and around its possibilities to achieve contact with the divine. Broadly said, salvation-oriented writings, excluding from the survey cosmological discussions. Second related question that I shall attempt to answer is why nature? Why introduce nature as the agent of the soul's imprisonment alongside being better than the usual suspects of body or matter? Is physis synonymous in such context with body or matter, or does it imply something more? Before embarking on the exploration of porphyry iamblichus, it is necessary to report some textual landmarks in the Neoplatonic discourse on physis and soteriology. On the Platonic side, one such key passage that transpires also from Porphyry's text that is before you is Phaedo 82e, 84a, which drastically depicts the soul as fettered thoroughly in the body, dia dedemenen entosomati, and glued to it, pros ke kolemenen, and even tricked into helping to bind itself, because the binding occurs through epithemia, through desire. Philosophy undertakes to free the soul by persuading it to literally pull itself together from the dispersion in the body and to withdraw itself. This withdrawal carries in Plato a primarily cognitive emphasis. The soul must learn to trust itself, not the senses, when it comes to knowing reality. However, an existential component comes in, as the soul can only achieve this by minimizing the impact of pleasure and fear as the two nails which affix her to the body and make her a motor force and a motor force to it. So body-like cognate to the body. Otherwise, the soul would bind itself again, fall again into dynamic of binding itself by pleasure and fear to the body. In Plato, you have no intermediary entity between soul and body, but only the decision of the soul and the action of the soul and the solvific interaction of personified philosophy. Second Platonic passage that surfaces repeatedly in the Neoplatonic discussion is the famous passage about the light from the earthly to the divine realm in Theaetetus 176 AD. There Socrates underlines that evils necessarily roam around mortal nature and this region here. Mortal nature, snete physis, can in Plato be understood as probably mortal reality, the sum total of that which is mortal, which is characterized by being mortal, rather than the distinctive force at work in the material realm. Snete physis is free from activity and does not hinder or oppose the flight of the soul, the assimilation to the divine by virtue of thinking. However, once physis gets conceptualized as an entity in its own right, the Platonic passage can be read with new eyes as signifying a certain aspect of the entity, the connection between physis and mortality, or it can be conceived even as a designation, a type of this entity, with just an explanatory epithet. And in this light, nature, mortality, and evils appear intimately connected. The idea of physis as an active agent, a magician trying to charm the soul to assimilate itself to the earthly region, can be found in Plotinus' Ennead 4:4 passage 43-44. Within a discussion of the extent to which the wise men can be affected by magic, Plotinus retains that only what is irrational is affected by magic, not the soul itself. How to spells the wise men will dispel the powers of love, trance, and magical rites. After establishing that demons too can be influenced by magic, because they are subject to passion on account of their irrational part, Plotinus modulates from the ritual aspect of magic to a more metaphorical existential aspect of charming and being charmed. For everything that is pros allo, that stands in a relationship of something else that is directed, oriented towards something else, can be or magically influenced by that other. For that towards which it is directed in the relationship, that thing magically, that entity magically influences it and leads it along. The verb behind the magically influence is goetoietai. You can of course say bewitched or charmed or whatever, but the idea is it really is subject to external manipulation by magic, so to say. Given over the previous context with all the forceful real life, so to say, idea of magic. Therefore, also all action is forever subject to magic, as is the whole life of the person who leads a life of action. Or to practiku bios is the one who is a practicos. There we have the idea of different forms of life, inter alia, the form of the, let's say, action-oriented practical life, the vita activa, as it will be later put. When he's moved to that which attracts him with its charms, how come that somebody establishes a relationship with something else? Well, he is drawn not by the arts of magicians, but by those of nature. Who magon technas alates phygeos, as the seed, apate, binds and joins together one thing to another, not spatially, but by the love chance, by the filtra which it has handed out. But what remains, so to say, the bottom line, is that only contemplation is beyond the influence of magic, because nobody is moved by magic towards himself, for he is one, and that which he contemplates is he himself, and reason is not deceived, but does what it should, and it performs its own life and work. So there is some kind of life and work proper to the logos, and only interior, only contemplation does this life become active in a manner unhindered by external influences. There, in the sphere of the pate and so on, and of the material world and of physis, there, however, there is not that which belongs to himself, and it is not reason which provides the impulse, but the extensions of passion, which are also the ruling principle of the irrational. For the care of children and the endeavor to marry possess an obvious attraction, as that all that entices humans because it becomes pleasant through the desires. But as to the actions, so here we are on the level first of the nice part of life, as a bios apolos post, so to say, and now we get to actions and other things and politics. But as to the actions, some are moved irrationally by violent evolution, by the loss, others similarly by desire, and political communities in striving after political offices have our love for domination as their trigger. And all the actions that are done in order to avoid to suffer have fear as the cause, and those which regard excess, desire. Those that are accomplished for the necessities of life, as they strive to fulfill the needs of nature, to fill up the neediness of nature, bear an obvious mark of the violence of nature that has adapted us oikeiosas to living, to life, that is to life in this material sphere. Starting from an idea of sympathetic magic, so to say, wherein in the relationship between two things, there is a bond between the two that allows one to exercise an effect on the other, Plotinus develops a conception of physis as the magician par excellence, binding together things by means of relationships. The only sphere in which man is free is contemplation, because the relationship is not one between two separate objects, but rather a return to oneself. Plotinus's panorama of quasi-magical processes affecting human life starts from the passions as the originating principle, even of the irrational life and activity. The fact that outward object can exercise a spell on us, this fact is rooted in ourselves. This fact resides in the extension of our own passions to external objects, which thereby become desirable and move the human being to specific actions. Nature exercises not just magic, but force, via, and renders human akin, makes them fit to a normal earthly life, which is in fact alien to them, thereby drawing the soul from that which is most archaeon to it, its very self, that can only become active in contemplation. The last group of texts to be considered are the Chaldean oracles, because some of the fragments in the Chaldean oracles whose influence for post-Plotinian Neoplatonism is widely and unanimously acknowledged, because some of the fragments focus on nature as a very ambivalent, let's say, cosmic force. It is notoriously difficult to reconstruct the theology and worldview of Chaldean oracles, and we can never be sure we've done it correctly. However, we can at least reconstruct how such Neoplatonists Proclus read the oracles, and given that Proclus, as Marinus tells us, stands in an exegetical tradition that is rooted, so to say, in the commentaries of Porphyry and Iamblichus on the oracles, we may take Proclus's reading to, let's say, reproduce or continue earlier reading. It's the best, let's say, the closest we can come to the Neoplatonic understanding of the oracles, if not 100% of the oracles themselves. What do we find? We find in fragments 101 and 102, they plus brief injunctions, ritual injunctions, not to call up ritual, not to conjure or evoke the directly visible image of nature or the direct vision of nature. So do not make nature appear or whatever. And the injunction not to look at Physis, for her name is paid for. As we learn from Proclus, the directly visible image is, or direct vision, is the moon. We can see that from his commentary on the Republic or from his commentary on the Timaeus, where he writes, the moon is for the mortal beings the cause of nature, being the directly visible image of the primeval nature. This primeval Physis is presented by Proclus inter alia in his commentary on the Timaeus in starkly Chaldean terms, going on yet other passages, one of which speaks of a boundless nature, Physis apletos, that floats suspended on the back of a goddess. Proclus identifies the goddess with a life-giving goddess, which he identifies with Rhea, for example, or Hecate, in the intellectual realm. And nature, therefore, depends on, hangs down from, and is connected with this life-giving goddess that actually stands over the demiurge and is closely associated with the demiurge. Another passage in the Chaldean oracles emphasizes nature's sway throughout the cosmos, and Proclus draws on that to enforce the importance of Physis and her crucial contribution to maintaining reality. The link between moon, nature, and Hemamene, as we see it, is not original. However, invested with the authority of the gods themselves, it becomes a particular reference for later Neoplatonism. Here, too, nature has two faces in the Chaldean oracles. As for that matter, does Chaldean Hylek. To stick with nature, nature is of a divine origin and has a crucial function in the cosmos, or in the cosmoi, so to say, in the Chaldean view of several layers of the world. However, its connection with Hemamene makes it obviously problematic, and in other fragments, nature is also connected to demons, and these demons of matter play a very problematic role in hindering the ascent of the soul and the access of the soul to the mysteries of initiations that will lead the soul upwards. So nature persuades to believe that the demons are pure in fragment 88, and the offspring of evil matter good and noble. And this persuasion can, of course, be seen on a line with the Goetia that we've heard already about and Plotinus and then later Porphyry. With these Platonic and Chaldean and Plotinian texts as landmarks, let us turn again to Porphyry's link between nature and salvation. In three of his works, to Marcella, on Abstinence from Animals, and the sentences, we find a recurrent topos that characterizes his approach to the connections of nature with a philosophical ascent. We find the idea of three forms of life forming a hierarchy, a hierarchy in which nature plays an important, let's say, intermediary setting stone role. To take the version from the letter of Marcellus, after having at length discussed the Stoicheia, the basics of how the human being aspires to salvation should honor God, Porphyry embarks upon the question of ethics, stating that there are three laws governing human life, three nomoi, to the law of the cities, the codified variable product of social convention, which also strengthens social cohesion, He opposes the unwritten laws of God and of nature, or of God and of, as he qualifies it here, mortal nature, Tanaseanu Physis. Here we can hear in the background the Tanaseanu Physis from Theaetetus 176, A and B. The law of nature consists in determining the modicum of sustenance that is necessary for the body to survive and be healthy. And the law of nature excludes from the body everything that, and from the lifestyle, everything that is superfluous. The laws of God are directed towards another thing. They're not horizontally at work in the earthly realm. The laws of God aim at salvation. They are the law of God in the singular is given soteria Seneca and is the product of intellect, of nous. And here we already find a basic opposition that shapes not only Porphyry's soteriological approach to physics, but also that of Physical and Iamblichus, and later on the approaches of such let's say, more and less academic Neoplatonists, such as Dionysius of Cyrene, Hierocles of Alexandria, or later brothers. Intellect versus nature. That will be a constellation that will surface repeatedly. The law of nature has, therefore, an intermediary position. It is in itself a necessary, but not a sufficient step to salvation. It may not be missed, but must be transcended. Porphyry expresses this by the wordplay with parabainen and hyperbainen. You transgress the law of nature if you listen to empty opinions that lead you to an excessive love of the body and a wrong lifestyle. You transcend the law of nature, hyperbainen, when you despise it because you have overcome the body. And therefore play in another league, so to say. The divine law in turn can, of course, never be transcended or held in contempt. There is nothing higher or more important. This divine law links nous and soul. Porphyry describes how nous, intellect, explores the intellective notions that are in itself and then offers them to the soul as food. So the intellect sort of passes on, transmits his own intellections to the soul as his body, which he wants to nourish and foster. And not only does intellect hand over his intellections to the soul, but it also lights the soul up, shines its light on the soul so that it can read and understand the inscription of the NOI that the nous has engraved into it. The intellect is at once teacher, savior, nourisher, guardian, and the one who leads the soul upwards. The divine law therefore links intellect and soul, being both in intellect and in the soul, also bridge between intellect and soul, an idea expressed in other terms in 2032. To return to the law of nature, it is the first to be acknowledged and observed by the philosophical soul. We must use it to ascend to the good, to the God who has also ordered the law of nature. So Marcella, as a stand-in for the aspirant to philosophy, is exhorted to first practice the law of nature. You cannot bypass it in any way. And you need it as a stepping stone for the ascent to God. Another graphic metaphor used here is that of the membrane enveloping an embryo or the stalk to which wheat corns are attached. Both are necessary for nurturing and growth, but must be discarded when maturity is reached. The body is no meros and no part of the human being. What needs to be reduced in this step from the law of nature to the law of God is the post-Platonia towards the body, the affection which aligns the soul with the vicissitudes of the body and thus makes it, read in the light of the Philo passage mentioned above, take an active part in binding itself. Correspondingly, the law of God is connected with apatheia. The intermediary position of nature in this theological scheme is also taken up in the abstinentia, Porphyry's exhortation to a vegetarian life. This exhortation is directed solely at the philosopher who has understood who he is, whence he has come from, and whither he must hasten. The philosopher is the one who can maintain a cautious and distrustful safety distance to the goetoima of earthly life, to the charms of earthly life, and such a person who follows the unwritten and divine law, again the motive of the law, is about the written laws of cities, because the written laws of cities have been ordained within view of the intermediary life, the mesos, yours according to the law of nature. So here, Porphyry twists the motif of the different laws applied, linking the law of the city basically to the law of nature, making nature the paradigm and goal of the written laws, and reserving the unwritten for the divine law. The contemplative life of the philosopher unfolds itself in the domain of intellect and aims as a synthesis and a growing together of contemplator and contemplated as far as possible. Given that in striving to reach intellect and to live according to intellect, the philosopher strives to be naturally reunited with his own true self. That was a banishment of living a foreign, alien way of life, which must be put aside to return to one's ancestral home and be received there properly. That was of the garments which the soul as a marausia has been clothed in and which must be discarded. Emphasize that all that the soul took on from mortal nature, again the evil thought Physis comes up. All that the soul took on from mortal nature through its post-Platonia towards it must be put aside, so that the soul stands naked and exchanges its life here for another by purifying itself through words and deeds. Later on, Porphyry speaks about the philosopher of the one distrusting the goetoima of Physios, and this caution of the philosopher derives from the fact that the philosopher thoroughly knows and has explored the anankai, the necessities, let's say, of Physis, the anankai of nature, by which nature forces humans into a certain way of life and outlook on reality. Therefore, the philosopher is able to keep himself safe from every angle of attack. Again, the law of nature, consisting, as in Atma Kellam, in the appropriate frugal treatment of the body, is considered as an important, though intermediary step to progress, while nevertheless nature remains a negative force insofar as it foments the prospatia of soul to body and keeps the soul here below, separated from its original sphere, that is intellect. The same motif is also taken up and developed in the sentences, where Porphyry systematizes and theorizes Plotinian doctrine, so to say, from his own perspective, enriching it from his own perspective. There we get to see Porphyry's, let's say, metaphysics and existential outlook in a handy package. We learn that nature is located at the level below soul, which emphasizes the fact that soul is in the middle ground between two poles, between physics and intellect. We find again the metaphors of binding and fettering, but however with an emphasis now not so much on the evil force for overpowering by nature, but rather the emphasis lies here on the unhindered agency of the soul. The soul chooses what it wants to do and what it wants to bind itself to. The binding occurs through the conversion via epistrophe to what is wrong, to what must not be an object of epistrophe in a Plotinian or Porphyrian or Neoplatonic outlook. The epistrophe to the quality, the patterns from the body, the patterns that stem from the body. And it is set free again, or sets itself free again through impassibility, through apatheia, which is the key value of the life according to the intellect. This minimizes, of course, the power of nature towards the soul. What nature has bound, nature will untie. What the soul has bound, it will untie itself. nature bound body and soul, but soul bound itself in the body. Therefore, nature unties body from soul. What is meant, the next sentence explained, is natural death. The soul unties itself from the body, and only therein the soul can find liberation from the body and not the next body waiting for it, the next bodily existence waiting for it. The conversion of the towards the passions that stem from the body receives in sentence 29 Villian name of post-Platonia. In the discussion of the pneumatic envelope which the soul gathers in her descent through the astral spheres, Porphyry explains how the post-Platonia of the soul, its former body, produces an imprint on the pneuma, and how the state of the soul directly influences that of the pneumatic envelope. When the soul applies itself continuously to intercourse with nature, whose work is carried out, as Porphyry says, to a greater extent in the humid and subterraneous dimension, as a moist and heavy human, physically pulled down then to a lower place. The soul itself, being incorporeal, cannot be said to be in a place by nature. So here again we get a new angle. We have the pneuma as basically the interface mediating between soul and body. And the post-Platonia of soul towards body exercises itself and imprints itself through and in the pneuma, which then, as something more that can be moist or dry, is subject to the law of gravitation, so to say, subject to physical pulling down or ascending as objects and exhalations are in the physical world. Here again, the agency and choice lies with the soul. The soul decides how its pneuma will look like, and where its pneuma will then end up, in a low subterranean human place or in an astral dimension, so to say. And nature is not represented here as actively binding, but only that which attracts the pneuma and that to which the soul makes itself approach. The same emphasis on the agency of the soul is found in sentence 32, in which Porphyry takes up the leitmotif of the three laws of the ways of life in his exposition on the virtues, of which he distinguishes four stages: the civic virtues, the cathartic virtues, the contemplative, and the pragmatic ones. The last, the pragmatic virtues, refer to the pre-existing paradigms of virtue present in the intellect. First three, the civic, cathartic, and contemplative virtues, refer to the soul and map her ascent to intellect. Living as a human being according to nature belongs to the first stage of civic political life, characterized by the temperation of passions by metriopatia, so that the passions can be put to the use designed for them by nature. In that view, nature is, let's say, necessary force as far as the corporeal existence is concerned. Even the bête noire of Porphyry, have a certain positive aspects because they link soul and body to a certain extent, and because they provide for the body to a certain extent. And the first step would be to moderate the passions so as to serve the need of nature, the need of the living human being made out of body and soul, the need of the compound. But of course, Porphyry wants to get beyond the compound, not by natural death or anything, by severing body from soul, but by sort of withdrawing completely from any connection, from any post-Platonia with the body. And that's what comes up in the second level, which is a level of transition, of detachment from what is here. And the transition to the third level, the level of life according to the intellect. Basically, the two groups of cathartic and intellectual virtues, contemplative virtues, can be seen as a continuum, where in first phase, the accent is on detachment from what's below and transition to the higher, and in the second, with the contemplative group, then the soul can live according to intellect, has found assimilation to the divine, and has achieved the excision of the passions from, let's say, the life of the soul, the perfect separation between soul and Arte, and therefore soul and body. So again, nature has a certain importance and value as an intermediate stage, but for the philosopher, this stage must be transcended. On the whole, in all three writings, which all three have a protective aim, and two of which, the sentences and the letter to Marcella, also function as an enchiridion to facilitate the ascent to the divine, Porphyry acknowledges the law of nature and the old Stoic goal of living cataphysis, but only in the first stage of philosophical life. All texts are connected by images of the fettered soul enclosed in an alien container, and they are connected by the negative aspect of nature as an insidious force, a sorceress trying to keep the soul entrapped in this alien sphere. Here we can place Porphyry's approach in the line of Plotinus. What varies between the texts is the emphasis on the agency assigned to the soul in nature, while in Marcellum, nature is depicted as an enemy force that has prevailed and must be overcome and taken captive. In the sentences, Porphyry emphasizes the freedom of the soul to turn away from the body, and the fact that the soul finds itself of its own accord and can free itself if it decides to do so. The first variant, with the stress of the agency of nature in binding the soul, so an external force in binding the soul, squares well with Iamblichus's remark in the Anima that Plotinus and Porphyry assign in those cases the cause of the soul's descent to nature, as Iamblichus says, to Physis and to the irrational life. The topic of nature as Hemamene is not explicitly developed in the extant soteriological context that we have looked at, although Proclus mentions the identification of Hemamene and Physis for Porphyry's commentary on the Chinese. Between nature and nous, there is no bridge. The soul is caught in the middle and must fight the attraction of Physis. Physis, soul, and intellect are the three main players in the Porphyrian picture of soteriology, which seem not, as far as we have the text, not to develop the Chaldean connection of nature, matter, and demons. Although Porphyry has a very pronounced demonology, which explores also particularly the doings of evil demons connected with matter, he only mentions them tangentially in his discussions of what binds the soul in the natural realm. For example, when he says that the body, being flesh and blood, bears the exhalations, the aporia of material demons, or when he warns that if God does not take his abode in your soul, then demons will enter and possess the soul of a human being. But there is no explicit link between Physis and demons as we have it in the Chaldean oracle, and as we had it in Iamblichus to whom we now turn. To explore the role of Physis in Iamblichus, one major text is his reply to Porphyry, known as the Mysterics. I stress again the point that I focus on soteriological context in which Physis is discussed, not Physis as a whole. We can expand that later on in the discussion. Some points can also be found in his fragmentary writing on the soul, where ascent, punishment, and the soul's existential goal play an important role, or in his protracted. We shall briefly look at the latter two before turning to today's studies. In his protractic, which is a commented collection of maxims and excerpts, the conception of Physis varies with the sources, which Iamblichus examples and paraphrases. Thus, for example, the fragments from Aristotle's protractic operate with a broader notion of Physis, which is opposed to imitation in art. Physis is the primeval reality that man finds himself in, that man is part of the primeval reality with its own teleology and principles. Negative statements about nature are less pronounced in the protractic and gravitate not so much around nature to group, rather around human nature, which is equated more or less with the body. The double character of human nature as Iamblichus writes, commenting on a passage from the Leuven verses. The double character of human nature entails that an alien animal has grown unto us from generation, from becoming, from genesis. An alien animal, which some designate as a many-headed beast, other as some kind of forms of mortal life, other as generation work nature, or generation producing nature, physis genesis. And this is an expression that surfaces repeatedly in Iamblichus's writings, notably in the Mysteries, the idea of the physis genesis which can be taken more or less in the Mysteries for physics in total, but which here is linked especially to the human microcosm, so to say, and to the bodily dimension of that microcosm. Another passage taken probably from Aristotle's Retractic, there is the Platonic metaphor of the fettered soul glued to the body with a reference to the Etruscans, who have the practice to punish by chaining the prisoner viribly, limb to limb, to a dead body. We are, of course, the living part of the compound, and the dead body, the cadaver to which face to face and limb to limb is linked, that is the body. In the Anima, we find similar ideas, not so remarkably expressed when Iamblichus says that Plato assumes a double life for the soul. And obviously, Plato and Pythagoras are in the Anima the two identification figures for Iamblichus, so to say. And Plato assumes the double life of the soul, one separated from the body, one shared with the body, one choristes, somatos, one koine metotu. And therefore also actions proper to the soul, others shared with the body. The soul uses the body and practices or oversees the acts of the body, or one could also understand it so that the soul uses the body as an instrument. That's missing from the so thus therefore the soul uses the body as a whole and practices its acts or oversees its acts, and enveloping the body, coming from outside and being thus not contained by the body, enveloping the body, which has the role of an instrument or vehicle. But the soul also has movements of its own, all the movements that are free from the composed animal, and these movements that are peculiar to the soul bring to reality, actualize the substantial lives of the soul, the lives of the soul that correspond to its very essence. And these movements, Iamblichus identifies in states of divine possession, intellections that are free from matter, in one word, in the acts by which we are connected with the gods. So the higher form of life of the human soul proper to it, over which the soul has agency and through which the soul has agency, is the one that links the soul to the divine. Also the one, here a passive dimension comes in, which will come to the fore in the Mysteries, the one by which divine influence is received in the soul. Whether the second life is impeded by the first bodily life, and thus by the genesis of God's physics, Iamblichus does not discuss in the Anima. But another fragment assigns to Plato and Pythagoras the idea that the substance of the soul is above nature, is hyperphyes, and that the substance of the soul produces or generates nature, so that the soul's specific acts and activities are more venerable and ancient than those of nature and accomplished at a level above nature, presumably, right and third, unaffected by nature as such. In the extant fragments of the Anima, we do not find lengthy reflections on the plight of embodiment or enmeshment within nature, although it theorizes the soul's extent, distinguishes types of souls affected by passion or not, talks about judgment and expiation and purification and all of that, but it does not describe souls as engaged in a fight with body or nature, as far as the fragments are. The notion of hyperphyes surfaces repeatedly in the Mysteries, where Iamblichus' reference to nature and salvation cluster. Hyperfluence applies to soul outside the body, but also to the true divinatory foreknowledge, which has its origin in the divine realm. True divination is not produced by nature. Both theories deriving divination from cosmic sympathy or deriving divination from other aspects of nature, such as certain rigors of ecstatic experience, are rejected. The retort to Porphyry, which Iamblichus makes, the retort to Porphyry, who had advocated that maybe we could understand enthusiasmos as, let's say, the Aristotelian line, or in the line that also Lamprias develops in Plutarch's De Defectu Oracolorum. So this kind of naturalistic interpretation of divination, so to say, is something that Iamblichus rejects, and he retorts that being divinely possessed, enthusian, is not an act of nature. This recalls the emphasis in the Anima on enthusiasmos as one of the specific activities of the soul in its separated actual life. However, in the Mysterious, Iamblichus nuances the idea differently, emphasizing not even the soul's agency, but stressing that the enthusiasmos has its sole primary cause the gods. The soul should ideally be totally passive and receive the influence of the gods. At the moment, soul intrudes with its agency, the enthusiasmos experience is distorted. So if we should, with all due caution, ultimately hypothetically connect the anima and the Mysterious, then we could assert that for Iamblichus, the realization of the specific life of the soul, the specific activity of the soul, implies a kind of passivity, implies being docile and passively receptive of the divine influence without intruding upon the gods, so to say. What separates nature from soul is, in the Mysterious, inter alia, the irrationality of nature. Nature is constantly linked with genesis, becoming, or generation. And Iamblichus speaks repeatedly of genesio post physis to designate nature in the material realm. This genesio post physis has a double aspect. On the one hand, Iamblichus emphasizes its demiurgic function. Nature expresses invisible logoi in visible images, and thus serves as a paradigm also for human symbolic theology or for human cult. Furthermore, nature is an instrument of the gods, who use it to create, for example, divine signs, which as such are superior to nature because the gods have designed them. And by use of these signs, the god can communicate with humanity. In the passages where he develops his theory of God's nature and divine mantic science, Iamblichus dwells also on the parallelity between divination, demiurgy, and providence, underlining that in all three cases the gods remain separated from becoming and nature. And in this light, nature is important as the means by which the gods can reconcile their transcendence with their presence in and care for the cosmos. Insofar as demiurgy and contact with the divine are closely intertwined, nature indirectly and subserviently functions to enable and facilitate salvation. But there is also the other side, the nature which must be overcome and which actively drags soul down into becoming. Here Iamblichus is on the one hand very close to his speech and Porphyry, when he describes humans as gravitating between nature and intellect. To look at a famous passage from Book 5 of the Mysterious in the context of Iamblichus' theory of sacrifice. According to another division, we'll come back to the divisions, the great herd of men, now the idea begins to be developed, is subordinated to nature, and it is governed by natural forces and looks down towards the works of nature and fulfills the administration of fate, and receives the order of the things that are accomplished by faith and exercise a practical mode of thinking, practikonlogismon, which is exclusively about things within nature. So here we hear a lot of buzzwords that we heard already before, the idea that it's the practicospherios, it's the practicospherios directed towards nature. That's something that can be, that we've already heard in Porphyry, in the abstinentia and the sentences. And the idea that that is the dimension of the many and not of the philosopher, of the happy few trying to escape nature, that's already something known from Porphyry and not only. Now it's interesting that we also get the other side, a few individuals who make use of a certain power of the intellect, a certain power which is superfluous, which is above nature, which is higher than nature, distance themselves from nature and are led around to the separated and unmixed intellect. These people are also higher than the natural forces. Some others are born between these two categories toward the middle ground between nature and intellect. Some follow both. Some pursue a certain life mixed from them. Yet others are in the process of being set free from the lesser and moving to the higher. To the motifs already familiar from Porphyry's, let's say, transformation of the transformations of the Aristotelian framework of different lives and of the opposition between the life oriented towards action and life oriented towards contemplation. Iamblichus adds here another Platonic term when he speaks of the periagon type, which evokes the periagoge of Plato's Republic, which of course in Plato takes place through silences and a course of idea directed at turning the soul from Kakato to Parano, so to say. Iamblichus describes here a group that fits very well with Porphyry's group of philosophers who have achieved the contemplative virtues and will have risen above physis to apatheia. The middle category, oscillating between physis and nous, is a category in transition, so to say, that recalls very nicely the philosophers engaging in practicing the article virtues in Porphyry so as to be able to accomplish a transit to intellect. Iamblichus, who has by now already forgotten that he speaks not as a Platonic philosopher, as he does now, but actually as an Egyptian priest, now seems to recall it as he returns to the tension of nature versus intellect and nuances it ritually. The nuances, or the way he nuances it, is not surprising. If we have three types of people, then we have three types of cult. Those who perform the life of nature and live within Hemamene and so on, will perform a cult that is appropriate to nature and that uses natural objects and settings and so on. The others will observe incorporeal hieratic rules, set of hieratic rules throughout all parts of cult or theurgy. And finally, the third category, the in-betweens, practice a mixed mode of cult. All the tension between nature and intellect was so gravitating towards the one or the other links Iamblichus and Porphyry. The use to which Iamblichus puts it gives it a thrust that his master motive is approved of. And here we need to look at the larger context. Iamblichus's argument for the necessity of various forms of cults, which here operates according to the hierarchies of different addressees, is but one among a cumulative series of the hierarchies which aims on the one hand at saying I can differentiate very well between when material cult is needed and when spiritual cult is needed. But on the other hand, this accumulation of the hierarchies aims at proving the absolute necessity of material sacrifice and material cult. Because not only the practitioners have different conditions and different settings in which they are active. Also, the gods who receive cult are connected with matter or not connected with matter. Some preside over matter, some not, and therefore a twofold type of cult is necessary because also the matter-related gods must be honored. Also, the different kinds of being set in motion during sacrifice involve material as well as immaterial aspects. So the bottom line of the whole series of the hierarchies is that if you want to properly worship the beings that are higher than yourself, as Philip's, of course, a proper soul who recognizes its order in rank in the hierarchy of being, then you have to perform also material cult, whether you want it or not. So this is not Iamblichus's final word about cult exempting any category of people from cult. He only says that they observe an incorporeal and intellective tesmos throughout all parts of theurgy, whatever that incorporeal tesmos means. It need not mean that the parts of theurgy do not comprise material sacrifices. Iamblichus therefore embeds the topical distinction between life according to nature and life katamun, not in a protracted about clean matter unconditionally, but rather in apology for embodied cult as divinely ordained and as establishing avenues of contact with the gods. In this perspective, the realm of nature again remains a subservient but fundamentally positive balance. It is one important facet in the whole of cults and interaction with the gods. And for the ones interacting with physics, it's the only way in which they can enjoy the benefits coming from the divine. The negative side of nature comes to the fore as Iamblichus develops the systematic connection between demons and nature, which Porphyry has interestingly not explicitly linked and explored. The relationship with nature defines the status of demons. Not only do they belong to the realm of particularity, reigning over certain assigned regions of the cosmos, but they are, quote, natural and inseparable from the things they govern, while the gods, even if they direct the body, remain ontologically separated from that body. Not the mere fact of administering the body distinguishes a god from a demon, but to hear Iamblichus again, the distinction lies in being in relation with the generation working nature, with the genesiologos physis, and being divided by the genesiologos physis, as well as being affected by powers which incline towards becoming. This again does not assign also the demons a negative role, but merely a subordinate one. And Iamblichus underlines that demons serve the gods. And the demons are employed by these in the same way that nature is employed as an instrument in demiurgic and divinatory processes. But demons are the entity whose powers supervise nature and the binding of the soul of the souls into the body, so Iamblichus replied. So the demons are here at least supervisors of binding, not directly the binders themselves. So that direction is constantly and invariably directed downwards towards matter and towards keeping this bond untouched. Especially in his discussion of supernatural apparitions, where he lists criteria to distinguish between the apparition of God, that of a demon, and so on and so forth. Iamblichus, in serving the existential effects of the visions on the ritual recipients, draws a picture of the demons that brings to the fore their problematic aspects. Angels untie the petals of matter, demons drag the soul, into matter. The vision of demons makes the body heavy and punishes it with illness. It also drags the soul down towards nature and is not detaching from bodies and from sense perceptions which are empty bodies. And it holds fast those who launch themselves towards the fire and in the region down here, so it holds them fast here on that, and it frees not from the fetters of fate. So it's a very negative and negativo characterizations of the demon state. Do not do what we yearn for when we yearn for salvation. They do not aid our ascent to the fire, but on the contrary, hinder it. In yet another version of the same, demonic apparitions induce in the recipients a yearning for becoming, a desire for physis, and for the fulfillment of works that conform to fate, to humanity. Seen thus from the ritual angle, the negative side of demons, related to nature, which largely coincides to what is ascribed to nature as opposed to intellect in 518 passage that you have before you. This negative side of demons obscures their metaphysical position, emphasizing the first one as the greatness, the better and higher. We find a certain synthesis of the two sides of the coin of nature, the positive and negative one, related in Ilinca's apology of Egyptian religion, as he understands it, where demiurgy and salvation are brought together. Unlike what we insinuate, according to Ilinca, the Egyptians are well aware of realities beyond nature, recognizing and acknowledging the life of the soul and the intellectual life, distinguishing it from nature. The Egyptians acknowledge the demiurge who creates for intellect and reason, and the Egyptians place a pure intellect before the cosmos, as well as other intellects, and indivisible intellect in the cosmos as a whole, and a divided intellect in the astral spheres. So with the Egyptians, we, according to Ilinca, do not only get physis, as Porphyry have argued, but we get a lot of nous in there. And this perspective shifts from the demiurgic to the soteriological perspective when Ilinca emphasizes that Egyptians do not only theologize nature and intellect in a proper way, but also offer a ritual mode of ascent to the higher entities that are above Immanuel, that is, above nature, basically. The knowledge of demiurgy, the top-down perspective, is here supplemented by the expertise in the reverse dynamic leading the soul upwards. Shortly afterwards, Ilinca reiterates the interwovenness of demiurgic and soteriological dynamics when he refutes Porphyry's assertion that the Egyptian consider that everything is bound by heaven, and that the worship of the gods somehow paradoxically aims to achieve the release from the bonds of Heimamene in a manner that Porphyry insinuates reminds one of the Homeric Streptoi. Gods cannot be convinced to loosen the bonds of Heimamene. Ilinca obviously rejects the interpretation on various grounds. And one interesting ground is that he says not all is bound by Heimamene. Here again, we find the reiteration of the idea that the soul has a specific higher life and agency, the idea encountered, for example, in the anima. The soul has in itself a principle of periagoge estonoeton. Again, with the point of periagoge, so the whole, it is in the power of the soul to turn itself to from the lower to the higher. And this principle of periagoge allows the self to enter into contact with being on the divine and to detach it from becoming. And therefore, Ilinca can write on lines very similar to Porphyry's sentences. According to these principles, the principle we are also able to set ourselves free when our better part is active and is directed towards the higher beings. Then the soul is completely separated from what holds her down into becoming, and it detaches itself from the lower entities, exchanges one life for another, and gives itself over to another world, having left the old one completely behind. Salvation becomes here a matter of soul's concern and decision, provided the soul orients itself towards what is higher than itself. Nevertheless, Ilinca also emphasized that while the lowest natures that stem from the gods are intertwined and are intertwined with the generation of the cosmos, the body accomplish the work of Hemamene, that gods operate the release of the soul. So Hemamene is connected with the lowest natures, with the Physis that come down from the gods, proceed from the gods, but are intertwined with the generation of the cosmos. And the gods are associated with the release of the soul, and therefore they are accordingly worshipped because only they can command over necessity and provide release from it. The idea that is interesting here is that Iamblichus asserts that the gods, in so doing, do not operate in a way that is contrary to demiurge and contrary to previous decision. The gods are not streptoi, as Porphyry had insinuated it. They do not react to demands so as to counteract what has been ordained to counteract demiurge or anything. Rather, they act in a way that has been foreseen and preordained from eternity. For, so Iamblichus says, from the very beginning, God has sent down the souls so that they may return to him again. As in the cosmos, becoming and this universe are connected to the intellectual substance, so also in the soul's the release from generation is in harmony with the care directed towards their generation. So the care directed towards the generation, everything that is oriented to demiurgical downwards, is connected and is just preordained as the release from generations. Ascents and descents of the soul are already foreseen and planned by the demiurge. Salvation is thus the product of demiurges. It is divinely designed and embedded in the overall structure of the world, including nature. And the cult directed at the gods, whose role is to produce release, is ultimately, let's say, a sub-program of demiurge. In this perspective, nature as well as God are two poles of one whole, both being necessary and preordained, let's say, overseers of regions in which the souls can and must dwell, alternately. Let us now bring the two together, Porphyry and Iamblichus, and come to the last question: what is the added surplus, the added value, speaking about nature and not about just body and matter? What difference does it make if one speaks of the bonds of nature and not of the bonds of the body? As far as their conception of physics in the context of soteriology is concerned, Porphyry and Iamblichus share some important patterns of thought, as we have seen. Both adapt the distinction of the practical versus contemplative life to the Platonic outlook, and both construct a tension between nature and intellect, with the soul in between, attracted by the one pole of nature, and striving to overcome this attraction and essential intellect, which they, by their substance, have a much closer connection. Both Porphyry and Iamblichus copy because they draw on the metaphor of the bound soul from the Phaedo, to graphically emphasize the force of nature's attraction, and the fact that the soul, when in the realm of generation and nature, is attached to something that is intrinsically aligned to it, like a cadaver or a beast with its own lower life. That the soul is ontologically above nature, both as well soul and as a particular human soul, is not only in the position of Porphyry, but also as we have in that of Iamblichus. Therefore, both emphasize the agency of the human soul to free itself from the bonds of nature. This conception of the double life of the soul, the higher dimension of which allows it to remain untouched from becoming nature and to release itself and connect with the divine, as well as the emphasis that some persons can activate the hyperphyes power of intellect and actually live this higher life, expresses the same pattern of ascent as self-activation of the soul or return to oneself that Porphyry had described. Nature is for both insofar a danger as the soul accepts to be attracted by it. Problem lies in the fact that, soteriologically speaking, humans experience nature at work in themselves, not only in their body, but as Iamblichus would put it, in the alien animal or lower kind of life attached to the true self. as Porphyry would put it in the post-Patria, that makes the soul live with and for the body. So in this context, we find expressions that indicate that it is not just matter, inert matter, objects, an object, the body is an object that hampers the soul, but talking about nature highlights the dimension and existential experience of a force at work within one's being, of a dynamic force within one's being, a force which has a key function in the macrocosm and its maintenance, but also makes its influence felt in the microcosm of the human being. And this force proposes, here this whole idea of persuasion and goetheia comes in, proposes to the soul a wrong identity by making it perceive self and happiness in terms of corporeal life. Even in the guise, that is Porphyry's life, Metaphysic, in the guise of the philosophical frugal bliss that also somebody like Epicurus would have. Insofar, nature can be conceived as the beguiling sorceress, entrapping soul, or the enemy binding the soul that needs to be subdued and bound in turn. It can also be conceived in another set of metaphors as a realm into which the demons, as the active forces of nature, again the dynamic and personified aspect, pull, so to say, on the leash of the soul, dragging it down and not letting it escape to divine fire, as I am puts it, or to intellect as Porphyry would rather have it. So in this context, nature, all the demons associated with nature, assume an active, dynamic, catagogic role. In the emphasis on the catagogic role of the demons, Iamblichus appears even closer to the Calvian oracles than Porphyry. Porphyry, on the other hand, as the more martial voice, urging to bind the binder, to subdue nature as an enemy, to break free from the patterns as cruel despoti, and instead bully them into submission to oneself, one's true self, as the despotes. But this martial tone is interestingly restricted to ad martellum, which, while in the abstinentia and the sentences, we've seen that the emphasis is on the soul's agency and the soul's return to itself. And this does not use the language of submission, of victory, and captivity with regard to nature, but rather the spatial metaphor of rising over it. This picture may be explained in terms of the different genres of the writings and also of the addressee of ad martellum. As a beginner, Marcella is taught to observe a rule of nature and then transcend it, that would put the exhortations which Porphyry assembles there at the level of the, let's say, civic and then cathartic virtues seen from Satan's 32, and their detachment is paramount and must be enjoined by means as and metaphors as drastic as possible. The negative aspect of nature is that, with differences of nuance, the same for both Porphyry and Iamblichus. The main difference lies in the positive aspect of nature, which both integrate into the soteriology. For Porphyry, the positive aspect of nature is that its law is the first step on the way to intellect. It cannot be bypassed, but must be transcended. Iamblichus does not employ this motif. Instead, he derives soteriological consequences from nature's role in the cosmos and its place in demiurgy. Nature is part of demiurgy, is under constant divine supervision and direction. As such, it is instrumental to the gods in creating avenues of supernatural communication and contact with humans. The demiurgy of which nature is a part provides both for souls' defense to the realm of nature and fate, as also for the ascent from it and for contact with the gods, while in the material world, and to the whole of the divine, not only to the deities above matter. In Iamblichus, therefore, nature provides not only a rule of life tailored to allow the ascent to the divine after it has been transcended, but nature provides a means of contact with the divine even for those who have not transcended it yet. But of course, this emphasis is on nature at a macrocosmic scale, not on nature as an active force in the microcosm of the human composite being. In the microcosm of man, there both Porphyry and Iamblichus agree, nature is fraught with dangers because it leads the self to a distorted conception of its true life and identity. Thank you very much.